Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Future Frame TV. I'm Elise Krozer, your host on the Inequalities channel, presented by Traces.Dreams. I'm here today with Diego Castañeda. It's our follow-up episode with Diego Castañeda. Diego was here a couple of months ago, half a year ago, almost, that was a long time ago, to chat with us about inequality and crises. You can check out the episode. It's episode 4, 5, someone in the early times of the channel, and you can have a look at what we were talking about there. Today, we're going to talk about his brand new book. Welcome, Diego.
Thank you, Alice.
They flattered you into working, and now we see the result. The result is on your left shoulder. It's the beautiful green-black image book called Pandenomics.
Try to.
Pandenomics, you can order it now. It's a fantastic book on the economic history of crises. We'll talk about it in a second. And as Diego mentioned, it was in the thinking just at the time of our last conversation.
Exactly.
Let me just briefly present Diego for those that haven't seen that episode, or if you want to see it afterwards. Diego is an economic historian. He still is that. He is also the head of economics, finance, and international development at the think tank AID, the Agenda for International Development. In that capacity, he does research on a number of subjects all over the world related to international development. But specifically, what we want to talk about today is this relationship between crises, pandemics, and inequality. Diego, can you tell us a little bit about the new book of yours and what you're talking about there?
Yeah, well, it's obviously about the pandemic, COVID-19 crisis, but instead of trying to discuss like the present, because it's very hard because things are still going on. Like we do not know which will be the end of the history here. I mean, it could be in a few months, it could be in a year, it could be hopefully in a few months. Let's say just that. Oh, days will be better, right? But instead of trying to talk about the present, it's still going on. I try to have a different point of view, one from history, and one in which we delve in 7 or 8, I don't remember exactly, different pandemics through time, from early Roman Empire to today. And in that period, we try to understand what are the lessons that we learn from different pandemics. How our experience as humanity through history has shaped the way we have reacted to different pandemics through time, and it's also shaping how we are acting today. Like, for example, a lot of our tools fight this disease, like the sana distancia, that's for social distancing, or the quarantine, or the lockdowns, or the I don't know, the prophylactic measures, like cleaning your hands,
sneezing,
like with yeah, all that actually are things that started to be used like 700 years ago or 800 years ago, and then got perfected through time, and we're still doing it. It's like, it's very
hand washing
amazing.
Is so much more sophisticated today.
Yeah, of course.
First of all, we have soap, right? So that's
that's a great improvement, right? And clean water. But it's really funny because, I mean, the intuitive thing to think, for me, it will be like, we are in the 21st century. We can send stuff to Mars. We have like super high tech. We have a lot of sophistication, and we're still using pretty much just keep at your home and wash your hand, which is things that were being done at the time of the Black Death. So, I mean, it's 7 centuries of collective learning, which we didn't get that far. I mean, we have improved on that,
but is that because these measures are so good, or is that because we just don't know what else to do, or why are these so prominent, and why is there no possibility to rely on high-tech solutions?
I think it's both things. One is that they work. They have proven, and the things that work, you just keep doing them. It's like, really, in infectious diseases, they propagate from people having contact with other people. So you prevent people from having contact with other people, the disease will slow down. So that's very intuitive and straightforward, and that works. That's what we have to keep doing it. Although different diseases don't necessarily have the same type of beneficial effect from that measure. If the disease like cholera, for example, what we said is one of the chapters of the book. If you try to prevent cholera by locking down people, you will fail, because cholera is not propagated like people talking to each other. It's to contaminated water and stuff like that, not washing your hands. So not necessarily all epidemics have the same like measures you can take to survive them. But that's all something that we have learned in that process, because in the 19th century, when we have like 7 different pandemics of cholera through the century, like each 20 years or so, epidemic of cholera spread to the world and kill a lot of people. People actually learned that, these things we were doing with the Black Death, with the Yersinia pestis, the bubonic plague, it's not working with cholera. So maybe let's try another thing. Let's experiment with something else. And then they came out with, clean water works. So let's provide sewage to the people. Let's provide a source of clean water in the cities, because cities at the time were like dead trap. People, you probably will live longer if you live in rural areas than if you live in the city. So I think it's both things. It's that they work, or that generally work, and we are kind of a very empirically sided societies. Like we do a lot of things like try and error. In these circumstances, when a new pathogen appears and you don't know how to deal with it, you don't have any idea of how you're getting the disease or not. I think people tend to instinctively go to that try and error stuff. So I stay at home.
What worked.
And see what happens. If I keep doing this and I keep not getting sick, maybe it's working. So we keep doing it. And I think that's more or less the dynamic in this type of diseases. Like
there's a fantastic example. I don't remember which plague wave it was, where they built a wall in southern France to stop the disease. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was in the 1720, which was the last major outbreak of bubonic plague in Europe. It's very interesting because for me it was one of the most interesting like episodes to tell in the book, because it encompasses so many different aspects of society, like stuff like corruption, like plays a role, and the state capacity, and the rising of fiscal states in the world, in Europe, and the diseases in itself. And well, that episode, it was an outbreak of bubonic plague at the Levante, Eastern Mediterranean. In that time, the commerce was mainly from sea, and there was a lot of commerce and textiles from that part of the world, the Levant, to France and Italy, and the ports on that side of the Mediterranean. And at that time, there was a lot of a market in which they will take the clothes and the textiles in general and display them for towns around, all that. They were very, very profitable. It was like the big market for textiles in Europe side, and in the world. I pretty much was like the big market. And there was a ship that was called the Great San Anthony, I believe. I don't remember the name. I think it was San Anthony, which was property of one of the rulers of the High Council of Marseille. That ship was carrying the seas, but the owner, using political connection, managed to get to all the port, evade all regulations to find diseases, and get it to the city. And from his city, it starts to spread to southern France and a part of Italy. And it requires then like a very, very swift action, French government and from the Papal State, because in the frontier with Italy, the Pope was still ruling that part of Italy. And they kind of get to agreement, and they decide to build a wall, which was called Mur de Peste, the wall of the plague wall. And they build it around the city and on the region, so people could not escape. So people will not move from that city to other French cities and spread the disease. So pretty much they damn that city. Yeah, it's a lockdown. And that city got decimated, like lost like 40% of the population or something like that. But the rest of France and Europe got safe because they didn't allow the disease to transmit. Now, this is a time in which human rights or stuff like that was obviously not a concern for people. So they just built a wall, put a lot of soldiers in the wall. If anyone tried to cross it, they will shoot it, and you will not be able to cross the wall. And obviously, that's not something that we will do in these times, hopefully. But there's a lesson there, and it's mainly of state capacity. The French government at that time was the government of a very famous French finance minister, Colbert, which was one of the modernized of France. He actually raised a lot of revenue. France. He made France like a state-of-the-art fiscal state, and he has a lot of money to spend in whatever they need. They detect the epidemic was there because they have a system of kind of keeping track of diseases around since they are experiences in the couple of centuries before, and they attacked and shielded the rest of the country from the disease, and that was the last big outbreak of bubonic plague. They got there. That for me reminds me a lot of what happened in China with Wuhan, the city of Wuhan, in which they rapidly locked down the whole city and preventing it from spreading to the rest of the country. And in these kind of diseases, actual diseases, time is of the essence. Time is everything. There's some estimates from COVID-19 that if the Chinese authorities would have locked down Wuhan 1 week earlier, overall cases China would have been half the number they actually got. So 1 week was a massive difference. And the same probably was in the case of France in the 1720, in which if they have acted a little bit faster, probably even less people who have died. And that's something that to this day, not in all countries, it was not a lesson learned in all countries. Like we see that a lot of countries, for example, England, in the United Kingdom, in the COVID-19 crisis, they actually take a lot of time to impose lockdowns or they take sanitary measures to prevent the disease instead of acting super fast like they did in Australia, in New Zealand, in Taiwan, in Vietnam, in China, in general in the Southeast Asia region. And that's like an example from history that actually talks a lot to the present in that sense. And the book full of that type of examples. So for example, one concern I know is a concern for you and it's a concern for me with climate change, right? This disease is the COVID-19 is related to environmental degradation because in getting like the cities and the urban expansion of the countries to more, let's say, virgin environment, they are starting to get to places that have a reservoir of pathogens that can viruses and bacteria and stuff that actually we are not accustomed to deal with, that are new and can get transmitted to animals and the animals to people, etc. And that's something that we have observed, not because the same causes, but we have observed in history. Like today is mainly due to our activities in the environment, the environmental degradation, all that. But in the past, we also have like climate change and stuff like that, but not necessarily product of human activity, but nature, like the activity on the sun and stuff like that. In the bubonic plague of the 13th century, 13th and 14th century, we have this minor, like little glaciation in which the temperature of the earth decreases. You have harsher winters, and that harsher winter had to affect like crops were less productive, the land was productive, so people had less food in that period. And also there was this little animal like a mouse that was called herbilins or herbilinos, which are kind of mouse that live in what will be today Mongolia, that area above China. They are the species that had the fleas that transmitted the bubonic plague, and they killed that animal, and then the fleas had to move to someone else, and they found humans, and let's eat humans. They got humans, and then to trade and all the commerce and wars that was happening in the world at that time, that fleas got traveled to around the world, and eventually they spread the disease to everywhere, right? That's something. It's not the same, but that's
There are
something
certain parallels, of course, and there's also parallels in what you just said in terms of reacting fast, right, or swiftly, and or not necessarily only correctly, but timely.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about where do you think it comes from that some, let's say, regimes or orders, governments act swiftly and others don't, like happened in the case of the UK, the US, and others.
I think it's a difficult question because there's different factors. I think one is clearly state capacity. Like if you want to act quickly but you don't have state capacity, it's like, well, you want to do it, you just can't do it. It's more to us in Latin America in general. Like Latin Americans, they have very limited fiscal capacity when these crises arrive. They really have a lot high levels of debt in general, so they have less capacity to spend money freely, and they will therefore more fiscally conservative in that. So they have less room to act, right? So in that sense, even if they want to make a huge expenditure expansion, they have certain limits that other people from other countries or in the developed world didn't have these limitations. But that's also, I think, political will. Like there are states that just simply will do what they had to do. Like we have to do this to save lives, so we will do it. There are states in which maybe political considerations, elections, whatever is happening in their country prevent them from actually doing what they should have done. I think there's also a problem of, I would call it political unity or national unity. If in your country you are facing a lot of struggle, a lot of political conflict, and it's very, very difficult to have like collective action for solving problems, you probably will not react well because this type of diseases does require a lot of coordination between the different orders of government, like federal governments or national governments with the state or local governments, municipalities, canton, all these type of different kind of government that exists in different countries. And that's an example actually that I took from Mexico in the early 20th century, in the so-called Spanish flu pandemic, in the influenza pandemic of 1918, 1920, because Mexico at that time was in the middle of the Mexican Revolution. As you can imagine, there was not a lot of national unity during the Mexican Revolution. A lot of governments were like, some state governments were with some faction of the revolutionary armies and other with another faction. And so it was impossible to have like very effective coordination. Like the federal government orders certain measures and then everyone complies. That was not the case. Each has its own measures. And the war also have left like a lot of people with hunger. Like we have a year in 1915, it was called the the year of the hunger. Food was very, very scarce in that year. And we also have a like epidemic of typhus the year after that year. And then after that year arrived the Spanish flu. So it was like a very bad time. And yeah,
It's you think it's bad now. Think about that time.
well, yeah, I mean that's one of the appendix of the book. I try to compare the actual crisis to that one because it's like the closest kind of similar crisis. And yeah, at that time, Mexico, for example, had between 300,000 and 600,000 deaths at that time. It's one of the countries more affected from the Spanish flu. But we are talking in a country that has like 40 million people. So we are talking about like 5% of the population died in that period. It's huge. It's a huge demographic cost. I mean, it's unbelievable. In the US, they had 100,000 and 800,000 deaths, which is like at the time it was a country about 130 million, something like that. So it was like a 2% of the population. It's also big, but not as big in the case of Mexico. Now we in Mexico. When at the time of the book, the last update I could do before they go to the print was in November last year. In November we had like 90,000 deaths. Today we are 200,000 official. Like that's 5 months since that day, and probably because all countries had this undercounting because of the difference in the reporting of death and all that. Right? So we have actually this measure that's probably double of that. Probably it's more around 400,000 deaths. Right? Well, that 400,000 deaths will be a comparable number to the one the Spanish flu, between 300,000 and 600,000. But the country now is a country of 127 million people. So actually, you will require like 5 million deaths today to have the similar demographic impact from the Spanish flu. So in that sense, this crisis is in absolute numbers comparable, but in relative numbers, it's nothing like that. It's not that the catastrophe that was 100 years ago. So I try to do that in that type of examples and not just talk about the historical aspects of it, which is actually the part I enjoy doing more. But I also try to do context with provide a little bit context with the present crisis, so we can be critical to what is we're seeing, and we can demand better actions from our government. But we also don't be like unfair or with what we're seeing. It's not like this is not the Black Death. It's not. There's no way this will transform in a Black Death. So we also have to be careful in how we make these historical parallelisms because it's very easy to say like this. Oh, this is like the Black Death. So capitalism will die because feudalism died with the Black Death. These huge changes in the system will happen again and again, and not because history not necessarily repeat itself, even if we can learn something about it.
And about this not necessarily repetition and what we can learn, what have you observed since the last time we spoke? And I mean, now the epidemic has continued for almost a year now. What do you think has changed? I mean, has anything changed substantially?
I would say yes, but it depends. Like the infectious diseases, pandemics in general, they are not like a universal pandemic. Like the pandemic has the same effect in every country. Each country has different effects because each country reacts in different ways because governments act faster or slower, or they decide to do things or decide not to do some things. Or sometimes governments try to do something, but their social structure is different. Like if you are an economy with a lot of informality, you will have different effects than other country with the same population and everything else is the same, but they have less informality, like stuff like that impact the effects of a pandemic. So I don't think we can say like there's an universal change in what was happening 1 year ago. I think we were seeing as different types of effects in different countries. I would say that one lesson from 8-9 months ago is that actually states really matter. Like for me, this pandemic is reivindicating the state. There exists a strong state that can actually provide social security and the system of the welfare state. I think this is something good. And that is a lesson that I hope at the world scale we are learning. I'm not so sure, but I hope, because I mean, if you might like or may not like the political regime in China or in Taiwan and countries like that. They are maybe more authoritarian, whatever. What they show clearly is that strong states work. I mean, you might have some different political tastes, let's say, in what you observe, but the state works, and that works even if you're in Australia, you're in New Zealand, you're in China, and states are not neutral in this kind of phenomenon. It's like they can make things really, really, really better. Like it was the case of New Zealand, was the case of Australia, was China, was Taiwan, was Vietnam. In Latin America, I would say it was the case of Uruguay scale because the pandemic was not so bad there. Or it can make really work, which is the case of the UK or the US. mess, for example. To a certain extent,
Brazil.
no, when in Brazil today is like the biggest epic fail in a year full of epic fails. But even in less dramatic cases like Mexico, for example, there's clearly for me a lesson that we need to strengthen the state, not weaken it, because weak states have performed in a worse way in this type of situation because they cannot mobilize all the resources they need to mobilize. They cannot, they don't have like the infrastructure ready for dealing with the disease and to help people deal with that. So for me, that's the main lesson. And I think in a lot of countries actually I learned, and that gives hope. But there's also I think that this lesson that we are still seeing a lot of lack of political or national unity in this issue. Like political conflict is more important in some countries than actually dealing with the emergency we are dealing. And these things is something that to me is unbelievable. Like people don't get that we are in an emergency. It's an emergency. We need to act, solve the emergency. After we solve the emergency, we can get back to I hate your candidate and I hate candidate. Let's fight for an elections or whatever. That's okay. After we solve the problem, not during the problem. During the problem, just fix the problem. You need to fix the problem. And that's something that I just cannot believe. There are countries in which it's like, I mean, for me, I just see that a lot of that in Mexico. That's actually sad for me because I see a lot of people actually engaging in absolutely idiotic debate about whatever instead of putting the attention in what you have what you have to do and what you should do. Like you need to solve this and this and this. So that should be your focus. That should be the discussion. And instead of that, we see a lot of
Turf wars.
nonsense. Yeah, it's like turf wars. For me, that's something I just can't believe that this happened. But again, if you look to history, that's how things usually happen. So this is like it's
Shouldn't
sad.
come as a surprise.
Yeah, exactly. Quite hopeful. Like, well, we have learned something in the last 3,000 years or so, but maybe not.
I
Maybe
like your hopeful point. I mean, I like the point that states matter for better or worse, right? Because it also means that acting matters for better
exactly.
or worse, but there is an impact, right? So try to do the good. It's
Yeah.
probably the recommendation.
Yeah. Another thing, for me, it has been a surprise. It was since the beginning, a year ago. It was like a frequent talk that we will face, like so, as a society, this like we will get tired of the lockdowns and these measures, and societies eventually will like say to hell with this and let's get back to normal, even if we end dying, right? And even if that's happening right now, and we're seeing it, for example, in Germany, which they have at least, I think they have like 6 months in lockdown or something like that, and the people are just like
Going
to hell
crazy.
with. Yeah, I mean, it's reasonable and normal to be great. But for me, what surprised me is that I would have expected it to be sooner. Not, I think they show a lot more resiliency that people get credit for.
It's an interesting point, and I mean, we are unfortunately coming to a close in our episode. We can have another one later talking about people's long-term mental effects. But I was going to ask you before we close exactly about that. I mean, your predictions have been extraordinarily accurate for me. I mean, whenever you said it's going to take longer than the next 3 weeks, and I thought it was going to be over sooner, well, you turned out to be right. So the fact that prediction didn't come out, does that make you change your predictions for the future, or do you have a prediction for how this is going to continue?
I think I would say two things. I think two predictions that I don't think they should call a prediction, but for me, I actually think it's really obvious that would be the case. But first, we will see a lot of different like a divergence in the world, because probably first world countries and countries that have dealt with the pandemic in a proper way, like China or the U.S. now with the Biden administration that is getting vaccinating people at a record speed. I mean, it's amazing. Like in 4 months, they will have pretty much everyone vaccinated. They will start to recover and grow super fast. And a lot of the developing world will be still riddled with the pandemic, with the disease, and therefore will not be like at 100% their economies. They will always grow slower. So we probably will see in that sense an increase in global inequality, I think, in the medium term, because we instead of seeing convergence in countries, we probably will see convergence. And I think that will happen. But that, again, that depends on the country. Like for some countries that recover faster, maybe they will converge again. Countries that get stuck in this for more months and months and months and months, maybe they will see a lot of divergence. And that's, I think, something bad, and it's something that we need to pay attention in a global scale. And I think with the disease, I think there's a lot of evidence right now that the whole world will not be vaccinated like in 6 months or so. So probably the rich countries, hopefully, will end vaccinating people like in the next 3, 4, 5 months. But then the middle middle income countries maybe will be ending like in a year, like in March to 2022 or something like that. But then you have the lower income country, maybe will end being vaccinated like at the end of 2022 or even at 2023. So even if the pandemic gets to under control in certain places, and even if some countries return to normal to their normal life, we probably will see things like at least in part of the world the pandemic going, and that will have terrible effects. And I don't think that we will be able to say like we are back to normal in the world, the whole world. I think in at least a year, maybe two.
I really hope that this time you'll be off on your prediction.
I also want that to be
based on my experience, I'm not so optimistic, but I appreciate that you share your concerns with us and that you wrote this fantastic book, Diego. Congratulations and run out.
Thank you. You were in the podcast. You are in the acknowledgement of the book, by the way. Sorry to spoil that, or maybe no, you already read part of that.
I already read it, yes. So I realized. But thank you very much, and thank you for chatting with us today about pandemics and its effects and lessons learned and lessons ignored. Let's hope that this is gonna get over sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I hope so. I missed to chat with you in person,
in real life. Yes.
Exactly, in real life.
Yes, we'll do that again as soon as it's over. Thank you, everybody, for watching another episode of Future Frame TV. I'm Elise Krozer, your host for the Inequalities channel, presented by Traces.Dreams. If you like these topics, if you want to learn more about inequalities, please join us again next Saturday for another episode. You're welcome to leave us comments, subscribe to the channel, and share the content if you like it. And have a nice afternoon, everybody. Bye-bye.